Hi, and welcome to Starwell Astrology. My name is Sharrie, and I am a Western tropical astrologer, and I specialize in shadow work. Today, I want to talk about the planets and our natal chart and how we are a microcosm of the macrocosm. And one of the Hermetic principles state that as above, so below, as within, so without. And everything is a microcosm of the macrocosm. And our natal chart is a map of this. It's the microcosm that is being reflected from the macrocosm. And each planet falls somewhere within us. But as the planets continue to transit in the sky, appearing outside of us, they make contact with our natal planets. However, to even add another layer to this, these planets also are interacting with each other in the solar system between themselves, and then also they make contact with our natal planets. So astrology is a pretty complex science, and I'm going to try my best to break it down to its foundation. And so we get a better essence of what it really means, rather than to just hear moon means this, sun means this, and if it's in this, it means this. I think it's important that we understand what astrology is rooted in and to really get an understanding of how it is being reflected in us and through us. And it's really us. But anyway, let's look a little bit further. So planets range from their lowest vibrational frequency to its highest vibrational frequency. So each planet has a potential to range from its lowest expression. For example, Mars, when Mars is at its lowest expression, a person can have angry outbursts or just be over competitive and aggressive. Or in its highest vibration, Mars can be pioneering, passionate, and also know how to naturally follow their gut instincts. So Mars has a range of potentials that's available to each of us in our natal chart. However, how we get to access this range is through a number of things. First of all, depends on the placement of our natal chart, whether or not it's in a strong position or in a neutral position or in a weak position. But beyond that, our deepest way to get to our natal placements, regardless of where they are in our natal charts, is to do shadow work. Because by doing that, we get access to all of our weak points, and then we're able to integrate them so that they're getting expressed from their highest potential rather from their weakest or lowest potentials. So everything in this universe is electromagnetic, and therefore it has energetic vibrational frequencies. And how we experience these planets externally is based on our own vibrational echo, but also our access to their potentials is shown in our natal chart, like I just said. So these transiting planets makes contact with our natal planets, and this will produce an energetic charge that can bring events and can trigger an emotional response. Now, how we respond is based on the level of our vibrational resonance. So in shadow work, we get the opportunity to pay attention to what we're thinking, but especially what we're feeling, and to acknowledge the feeling so that it can be brought to the surface for further self-investigation. We do this every time there is an emotional trigger to discern deeper emotional truths. And this is how we get to our shadow side. We can dig up our emotional wounding by paying attention to ourselves. The key element here is that we stay present to everything through the practice of self-witnessing and self-observation. We can notice ourselves in action. And once we notice ourselves in action, we stay attuned to what we're feeling. And once we stay attuned to what we're feeling, it can give us a deeper access to ourselves. Now, this is where we bring up the feeling and turn inwards and self-investigate and to get answers that is connected to our wounds. And the answers that we get shouldn't come from our mind giving us an answer because it's been doing that forever. What we're trying to get to is a place where we can stay open, surrendered, conscious, and allow the answer to come to us. And it doesn't come from thinking, it comes from a spark, a light bulb, a recognition. And when it comes through, you just know. So the work is to continuously work with ourselves at this level, but we have to be willing to stay open and to also be present to get access to the deeper side of ourselves. Now, the reason this is important is because everything we do, think, believe, and our intentions and our deeds are all being weighed, whether we choose to agree or not, whether we're conscious or not, it makes no difference. It's the law of cause and effect. So whether or not we're conscious of the cause, we are going to reap the effects. And it may not be immediate because reality is not so simplified where you do this now and you get the results tomorrow, maybe on some levels, but on deeper levels, not so much. Sometimes they get carried over through lifetimes and they become deep-rooted wounds that we carry through our DNA from lifetime to lifetime until we're ready to work with them. So regardless of whether or not we are aware, our soul is what carries this energy on through lifetimes. And this is the importance of shadow work, because when we become aware of all the aspects of ourselves, we are able to own all parts of us. And then when we own all parts of us, we're conscious of the choices we're making. When we disown and ignore what we don't want to know about ourselves, then it continues to affect us on an unconscious level. We're going to make choices and behave in ways that we're not necessarily conscious of. And this continues to add to our wounded patterns, which is what needs healing. So the part of us that's wounded is a fragmented self, and it is called the ego identity. And it is portrayed behind a mask that we call the personality. Very few people have a personality that represents their true essence, that is authentic. We all have personalities, but the majority of our personality is made up of conditioning. And because of this, we're not sure of what our core essence is. And most of us are not attuned to what is authentic and true to who we are at a core level or a soul level. But if you want to know what your authentic self is, you look at your sun sign. Because the sun sign, although a lot of us express aspects of our sun sign, a lot of times it's expressed in its lower vibrational frequency, as I just gave the previous example about Mars. So our sun sign also has that. There is the lower expression of our sun sign, and there's the higher expression of our sun sign. Usually, if we're expressing our sun sign from its higher expression, then it's usually our core essence and it's usually authentic. We always want to work with our core essence at its highest level. So let's break this down from an astrological point of view. In our natal chart, our ascendant sign represents how we see ourselves in the world, as well as how others see us, because it is our personality, our ego identity, as I like to call it. And it's the mask that we're conditioned to put on. It's a mask because the personality, unfortunately, has been shaped from conditioned beliefs passed on to us through our family. But also, these are expectations that we have to follow through on because they're the norms in our society. When we're born, we bring with us into this life our genetic traits, which is our DNA. And this is linked to past lives. We carry the memory of all our ancestry, including our own past lives, in our DNA. What we carry with us is actually inherited. And this plus the added layers of what we're expected to become through our own family lineage, current lifetime, is added onto that. We're born into this society, we don't get a true sense of who we are, except for when we're newborns and unidentified. The minute we get a name and we're labeled, and then we're taught about our culture and who we are, our gender, our race, our status, whether you're born into royalty or poverty, our traditions, our religion, that gets placed on us before we can even remember. Let's put it that way. And therefore, your ascendant sign is the sign where you have really no free will, because we don't get to change our race and our status necessarily when we're born. We're born into that. Yeah, we can change it as we get older, but when we're born, that is what we're born into. From our ascendant, this is what is placed on us. And through this, we're conditioned. And because of this, it overshadows our sun sign, which is our true and authentic self. It gets sidelined, and it is pushed behind the scenes because we need to fall in line with our family and our cultural traditions. So regardless of this, though, our sun sign is our core essence, and the soul lives behind the conditioned ego. It is the I am presence, which is always here. We just are not familiar with it, and therefore it's unconsciously living behind the scenes. And so the ego identity assumes the role of being you. And because of this, the soul does not get a chance to ever get to know its own core essence, or it does, but in a very limited way, unless we do the work, the shadow work. Now, this goes a little deeper, and I've explained in previous videos that the ego identity also is fragmented, and it has a shadow side. And the shadow side is what holds a lot of our wounds that we've brought in from past lives, and also our talents and gifts. It goes both ways. I just speak mostly of the wounds because that's what my focus is on. But what we bring from a past life is part of our shadow side. And it can be gifts and talents because sometimes we're not even aware of it, or maybe there's trauma around those gifts and talent and we have to get to it. Perfect examples of this is if we've been intuitive, especially the feminine power that has been intuitive in the dark ages and were persecuted for having these gifts. They get suppressed and become a part of our wounding, and therefore is a gift that is suppressed in our shadow. And it's something that we'd have to do shadow work to get to. Otherwise, we would want to deny it or ignore it or be afraid of it for whatever reason. Ego identity is so strong that when I speak of the soul, it's like I'm speaking of something strange and unfamiliar. And it doesn't really seem all that important because we are so driven towards our personality and living up to the expectations of what we're born into, and also the expectations for achievements in our lives, that there's really very little room for our soul. And it really doesn't seem like it's all that significant. But the ego's personality need us to deal with it all the time. So it's incessant, and it's always actively distracting us from turning inwards to discover who we are at a soul level. And that's because it really doesn't want to be discovered, because the ego identity loves that it's in charge. It loves that it has the power to rule over you. And in a previous video, I was talking about our battles are really internal. They are the internal battles that is our ego identity with our soul. And the inner battle is to somehow set aside the part of us that's the personality to allow the soul to come through so that we know ourselves at our core essence. And this is the work of shadow work, is that as you start to see yourself more clearly, it becomes something that you feel an urgency towards, that you have been denying a true part of yourself and it needs to seek its expression. So doing the shadow work allows us to recognize this in ourselves so that we're ready to allow this part of us to come through. So our soul or authentic self is never given the chance to be known. So it remains unrecognized in the background of our lives, but the soul is what we must answer to when we die, because it's the only currency we take when we leave this reality, whether we go to a different dimension or to heaven, back to God, or to a new timeline. The fact is that the soul is what we take with us. It is never the personality. And yet we dedicate our whole life to a personality, when in fact, that's what we leave behind to take on a new identity and a new mask in a new lifetime or a new timeline. And so it has really very, very little value, and yet we give it all of our attention. So how can the soul, which is the most important commodity that we have, be given the least attention or interest? Well, it begins with us being programmed to ignore it and to even treat it as though it's woo-woo or too spiritual or maybe even too religious, when in fact, it's our core essence. And should we try to know it, we get confused and we get all these mixed messages. We get bombarded by fear-based religious dogma, which, says that we're sinners anyway, and to look at your soul could even be like, going into the spirit world and you get possessed. I've heard those crazy ideas, but, or also even our ego identity, the part of us that is the personality, it gets noisier and more distracted because it does not want us to disconnect from it. It wants to keep the power. These are energies. I've said everything in this reality is energetic. We're electromagnetic in every way, and we're operating through frequencies. And our frequency is directed towards, or the energy of this frequency is directed towards the ego identity, which happens to be a lower vibration than our soul. So because our soul is connected to spirit, it is naturally a higher vibration of ourselves, but getting to it takes work, takes conscious effort, and it also takes an inner realization. Because if I'm saying this and this doesn't resonate with you, then it's not something you're ready to realize. But if what I'm saying resonates with you, then it means that your soul is ready for its liberation. So one of the ways to understand this through our natal chart is to look at our sun sign. And our sun sign is what will tell us what our truest essence is. And as I've said before, the ascendant is our personality, our ego identity, and it has very little free will. Actually, it has no free will. Let's put it that way. But the sun sign is what we have free will over because it's our spirit and it's our soul. And it's the part of us that we have access to if we're willing to understand it, to know it, to claim it. So to get to our sun sign, we need to do the shadow work so that we can remove some of the filters that are covering over our true essence. Now, the next statement I want to make, to me, is one of the most important things we can recognize. And I think it gets overlooked or maybe even ignored because it seems like it's too big of a realization for most of us. But the truth is that the sun is the source of all things in our reality, and we know this part. But an even higher truth is that your sun sign in your natal chart represents you being the source of your own existence in this reality. And this is a very deep thing to understand, in that if we understand that we are the source of our own reality, and that our reality exists through us, not outside of us or not for us, but through us, then we understand the responsibility that we're bearing in each lifetime. The sun in our natal chart is our vitality and it's our life force. The sun sign is your spirit, but also the soul, which is an individual extension of spirit. This is why the sun sign is your individuality, it's your passions, it's your inspiration, it's your illumination, it's your creativity, but it's also the part of you that is your core essence. It's also your purest self as an ego or I am presence before programming begins. So a newborn is born into his sun sign before he's conditioned through his ascendant. That's one of the ways to look at it. To take this further, look at your sun sign in your chart to know your true essence, and then look at Mars to see how you take action. Now, a full natal chart assessment is needed for me to go any further, but you can look at your own chart to try to understand what this means for you. You don't have to figure out all of what it means. You can start with simple steps, like just looking at your sun sign and then trying to understand what that sun sign means for you. And then also, natal charts are not generic, they are specific to who you are. It is important that you sit with your natal chart and try to understand what these planets mean for you specifically. Astrology sometimes gets a bad rap when we try to simplify it through bell curve astrology, which is what most of the astrologers are doing, because it is too general. I have nothing against bell curve astrology because it's kind of interesting to listen to potential influences that we have access to during certain periods of time, but they are a very limited way to look at your natal chart. And if you really want to understand your own natal chart, you have to take your time to slowly contemplate your natal placements, because each chart has a life of its own. And oversimplifying the natal chart is a very generic way to interpret a chart, because each natal placement is very personal to you. So you can look at your chart and start to unravel its secrets and its guidance and allow it to speak to you in ways that it can unfold at the level that you're ready to perceive it at. Let's look at the 3 personal planets that are in our natal chart. So we spoke about the ascendant, which is our personality, and it's where we have no free will. It's actually our karmic point, because we bring with us certain memories, wounds, and energies that comes from our ancestral line, as well as us personally through our past lives. But our sun sign, like I said, is our purest essence. It's what we need to strive towards, because it is our soul and it's our purest potential and our purest essence, which is not contaminated with our karma. Our karma keeps us stuck in the personality or the ego identity, but the sun is where we can be liberated from the ego identity. The other planets that we can pay attention to right now is our personal planets, which is Mars, Venus, and Mercury. These are personal planets because they show us how we act, which is Mars, how we feel, which is Venus, and how we think, which is Mercury. These planets rule the first 3 signs in the zodiac, which are Aries, Taurus, and Gemini. Mars rules Aries, which is our personal will. And the sign of Taurus is ruled by Venus, which is our feelings. And we can sense our true feelings in our heart. And then the sign Gemini is ruled by Mercury, which is how we think. Gemini rules the mind. So we're talking about heart, mind, and our free will. And this reality operates through those three main things because these planets play an important role in our day-to-day lives. They represent the foundation of our human conditioning. The mind, the heart, and our will are how we operate in this reality because we need to act and we act on our feelings, and we also are thinking while we're acting on our feelings. So they're very interconnected and they work together, and how they're aspected in our chart will say a lot about how we think, feel, and operate in this reality. To practice self-witnessing, we can begin to notice what we're thinking, feeling, and doing. Once we're aware of our thoughts, feelings, and how we act, we can begin to work with making conscious choices. This must happen with a strong emphasis on our feelings and emotional state of mind, which is our Venus. Our feelings are the most overlooked aspects of ourselves due to our conditioning in our early years of life. We're taught to feel based on what is acceptable and what is not, such as loud outbursts is not readily accepted in our modern society, so we have become programmed to negotiate our feelings to fit the expectations of those we want to have a relationship with, those we want to fit in with, such as our parents, our teachers, our community, our spouses. So right away, most of our emotions get negotiated from a very, very early age. And our Venus can show us our emotional truth. Our emotional truth is where we can know what we genuinely feel, what feels true to us. Mercury shows us our thought processes. Until we become conscious of our thought patterns, we are stuck in an unconscious cycle of repetitive thoughts that allow us to live in an automatic loop. Self-witnessing allows us to become conscious of this. Unless we do this, we cannot become conscious of the automatic thought processes to break this cycle. So we need to break the cycle of Mercury, which is the mind, the programmed mind. And we do this through Venus because Venus is what we're feeling. Most times we don't notice that the action we take is based on what we're feeling. And what we're feeling usually comes with a thought. So making the connection between these three is the clues or the keys that we work with through shadow work. So look at your Mars, look at your Venus, and look at your Mercury in your natal chart. Notice the sign, the house, the aspects it's making to other planets. Aspects are how planets communicate with each other, such as a conjunction. Conjunction is when two planets are together, the energy gets blended. Hard aspects are squares and oppositions. And a square can trigger a planet through some sort of friction, but they can force us to take action to get results. And then oppositions are conflicts or contradictories. We need to work with these planets to find the balance so that they meet each other halfway, so to speak. Easy aspects are trines and sextiles. Trines are natural gifts and their blessings, and sextiles represent opportunities. So notice how your Mars, your Venus, your Mercury are connecting to each other in your natal chart. And this will give you a general idea of your natal chart and begin to have a general understanding of how you think, how you feel, and how you take action. You can notice your ascendant sign, and you can look up what your each sign means. There are plenty of resources for that, and you can get a general idea of what this represents for you. Now, this can give you a basic idea of how we're thinking and feeling, how we act as a personality in our lives, and also Remember to look at our sun sign to see what our core essence is. And then from this perspective, notice how we're operating as an ego identity, again from the ascendant sign, and then blend this with the energetic influences of the other planets like Mars, Venus, and Mercury. So you have an assignment to look at your chart, if you so choose, to get a better understanding of yourself. And then hopefully by looking at your natal chart, you'll begin to decipher aspects of the self that you may not have noticed before. So thank you for watching. I hope to see you next time. And if you are new to my channel, I hope you'll consider subscribing and liking. And again, thank you. Remember, I also offer natal chart readings and shadow work one-on-one. If you're interested in my services, my information is below. Thank you and goodbye.